In this video, I'll show you how to take your Renegade Guard from this to tabletop standard in around about 2 hours, and then I'll also show you how to take them from this to this, which is that extra little pop to make them really stand out on the tabletop. So starting out with the Zenithal Prime, I've sprayed everything with Chaos Black, and then I've taken Corax White from above and about 45 degrees to catch most of those raised areas. We'll start off with the flesh, and the colour we're going to use for this is Gullman Flesh contrast paint. So paint this over all those flesh areas. Now if you want to add some variation to the flesh, you can do this using Darkoath Flesh, and you can also vary the amount of coats that you put on. We'll move on to the clothing next, again using contrast paints, and these are the 4 that I'm going to use to spread out across the different materials that we've got on the uniforms. When we're using contrast paints, you generally want to start off with the lightest colours first, as the darker ones will cover them, so we'll use Skeleton Horde to start. Now I'm going to use this predominantly on things like wrappings and bandages because it has that nice colour, but I'm also going to use it on some parts of the uniform as well, because it really does represent that classic Cadian look, but in a dirtier style, which is really apt for Renegade Guard. Next up, we'll use Agaros Dunes, which is a slightly more saturated, more ready kind of version of Skeleton Horde. And again, I'm going to use this interchangeably on some of the wrappings as well as some of the uniforms to give them more of a dirtier, high intense colour look. In the main, I'm going to paint all of the leather roughly the same. So the colour I'm going to use for this is no surprise, it'll be Snakebite Leather. I'm just going to take our time with this. So I'm going to use this along those belts and those pouches that we can see. We're also going to use it on some of the wrappings and some of the backs of the gaiters on the legs. Again, all we're looking to do is add variation, but tie the squad together by using those same colours and tones. One of my favourite contrast colours, and the colour I used in my very first video on YouTube when I was doing Death Guard, is Militarum Green. Now I'm going to use this across the clothing, again to represent that kind of green army fatigue that you may expect to find. Now again, I'm going to use it sparingly and in different areas and different models. I realised at this point that I probably need a little bit of a grey colour as well for some of the uniforms, so I went and used Space Wolves Grey, and again I just spaced this out on some of the models, doing some of the jackets, some of the trousers, to add that differentiation across the different models. The Zenithal Prime really does help to add tone to the colours. Now we're going to move on to the black areas, and I'm going to paint all of the armour panels using black Templar contrast paint. I'm also going to paint all of the weapons this colour as well. You'll see why in a little bit, but just take your time with this because it's a very powerful colour and it will destroy anything that you've done previously, so just take your time with it. Once that black Templar is dry, I'm going to go and start to add in some of the other details. Now the first thing that we've got to do is paint any of the wooden details, and there's some bits on the back of this guy here. So I'm just going to use Wyldwood for that. Again, taking my time because it's a powerful colour that will destroy anything that it covers. So if there's any lighter colours underneath, you could mess those up. Now we want to tie everything together a little bit more, and we're going to add some red accents to as many of the models as we can, focusing on things like drapes of clothing, face masks. The colour we're going to use this is Blood Angels Red, which again is another really powerful colour, but it'll really pop off the model from a distance and add some real nice areas to look at. Now there are some fur areas on the models which you can paint whatever colour you want. Personally, I'm going to go for Skrag Brown and Gore Grunt of fur just to get some variation, but this really is painter's choice. The last element we need to base is going to be all of the metal parts. So the colour I'm going to use for this is Leadbelcher. Now take your time because you don't want to get this on any areas that you've already finished. I'm going to use this across all the obviously metal parts such as spikes, buckles, and I'm also going to use it on some of the shoulder pads just to add some variation for when it comes to that final scheme. Because these are Renegade Guard, we're going to wash that metal using Agrax Earthshade, so it gives it kind of a browny, dirty feel. So again, take your time with this, try not to get anywhere you don't want it, but once we've got this part finished, we're probably getting to that point where we're tabletop ready. So that's taken me just under 2 hours to get everything to a nice tabletop standard. If you're happy with this, then you can base them and off you go. But let's stay tuned to the end. I'll show you how you can push this up to the next level to make them really pop on the tabletop. To punch the quality and the level of these models up, we're going to do some highlighting. So the first colour we're going to use is Ogryn Camo. We're going to use this to highlight all of those areas that we painted Militarum Green. Now it may be different for you in terms of what I've chosen to paint this colour, but it's really easy to just pick up those raised folds and you'll see straight away that this starts to give you a nice element and really raises the quality. Next up, we'll highlight those Skeleton Horde and Agaros Dunes areas using Ushabti Bone. Now this is a fairly thin paint, so just take your time, make sure you haven't got too much on your brush and just apply it on those raised areas. If you do need to put a second coat, then just make sure it's dry before you do that, but don't push the contrast too much. We'll highlight all of the leather next, and the colour we're going to use for this is Ungor Flesh. A real key element of this is how we apply it. Now, for some of those long straight lines, we will use the shape of the model, but certainly on some of the bigger areas, we're going to use more of a stippling effect on those raised edges to give the impression of nice worn leather that doesn't necessarily conform to an angular pattern. Continuing that theme of stippling the highlights on, we'll now use Thunderhawk Blue on all of the black areas. Now, the black Templar should have given you a rough idea of where to put this, as it will have pulled away from those edges. So just use a stippling motion, dotting motion across all those black areas to make sure that you get a nice rough highlight around where it's necessary, such as in all the cracks or the edges. We'll highlight the red next, and the colour we're going to use is Wild Rider Red. This is a real simple technique as well that really will push the contrast on the models and make them pop. We're just looking to catch those raised bits of fold on the clothing and also any sharp edges we've got on any hard armour parts or face masks. Highlighting the flesh can be a little bit of a challenge, but we're just going to use two colours. So for the light flesh, we're going to use Flayed One Flesh, and again we're looking to catch those raised areas such as the brow and the nose. And for the darker flesh, we're going to use Questor Flesh, again focusing on those raised areas and the sharp edges. Next up, we'll do all of the silver highlighting, and we can have a little bit of fun with this. So where you've got sharp edges, such as on blades, then you can use the shape of the model and just drag the tip of the brush along it to get a nice hard edge. We can also add more of a messy highlight which will simulate chipping on the models. Again, we're sticking with chrome, and what we're looking to do is paint this inside the Thunderhawk Blue we painted on the black. So where we've got the riot shield, for example, some of the armour panels, we can simulate some of that chipping in a really easy, straightforward way. Don't forget, we're also going to use the stippling effect on some of those bigger plates and shoulder pads as well, because it just looks like old, worn, damaged metallic. Now, as these guards men and guards ladies have turned away from the light of the Emperor, we might want to paint some chaos symbols on them, so we're going to do some really basic freehand. First off, take some Evil Sun Scarlet and just paint a circular type shape. Doesn't have to be a full circle, it could be a semicircle, a quarter of a circle, whatever you feel works. You can then paint in some arrows, and I'm being very rough doing this because it's, in my mind, it's just been daubed on. It's not been done by a professional graphic artist. When you're happy with your shapes, then you can highlight this again using Wild Rider Red just to help it pop and stand out from the armour, and obviously tie all of the red elements in together. To break up all of that silver metal, what we can do is use some contrast paints to change the colour. So we're going to use some Nardreg Yellow, and this will simulate a gold metal. So again, use it sparingly, but just pick out some elements which you think would benefit from being gold. And then we're going to use Gryph-hound Orange, and we're going to use this for any areas that we want to be a kind of coppery colour. Now, it's going to be much brighter than a normal copper colour, but you can always dull it down again with some Nuln Oil if it's too much for you. We're making really good progress now, so let's have a look at weathering some more, and we're going to add some rust. So the colour we want for this is Skrag Brown, and we're going to make sure that we've thinned it down quite a bit, maybe 2 to 3 parts water to paint. Make sure we've got a good point on a brush, and then we're going to just pop this where we think rust is going to form. So I'm looking at some of the las guns and the melter gun inside some of the workings of the joints. We're also going to look around some of the bolts, and we're also going to put some patches of rust on the shoulder pads. The other thing we can do is if we've got some big blades which we think have just been left out and have not been looked after, we can stipple some of that rust effect on to get a really, really nice end effect. So it took me about 2 hours to get to tabletop, and then it got me another 2 hours to get to this next step, which is I think the next step up. And I'm really happy with how these have turned out. They're a coherent unit, but you can see that they're Renegade Guard. You can see they're a bit ragtag. So I really hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, check out my other content, and I will see you next time.